The year is 1865. The American Civil War, a brutal conflict that tore the nation asunder, finally reaches its end. The Confederacy, built on the foundation of slavery, lies in ruins. The institution of slavery, the very cause of the war, is abolished, forever scarring the nation's conscience. Yet, amidst the relief and jubilation, a somber truth emerges. President Abraham Lincoln, the man who steered the nation through its darkest hour, is assassinated. His vision for a reunited nation, a vision of healing and reconciliation, is left in the hands of a nation still grappling with the wounds of war. This period, spanning from 1865 to 1877, marks a pivotal chapter in American history: Reconstruction. It was an era of immense promise and profound challenges, a time when the nation attempted to stitch itself back together while grappling with the legacy of slavery and the integration of 4 million newly freed African Americans into the fabric of American society. It was a period of hope, of societal upheaval, and ultimately, of tragic shortcomings that would reverberate for generations to come. As the smoke cleared from battlefields across the nation, the task before the United States was monumental. The South lay in ruins, its economy shattered, its infrastructure decimated, and its social order in disarray. Freedmen, emancipated from the shackles of slavery, yearned for a taste of the freedom they had been denied for so long. Yet, the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. What would become of these newly freed individuals? How would they integrate into a society that had for centuries denied their humanity? And how would the nation reconcile with the bitter divisions that had fueled the war? The answers to these questions would not come easily. Reconstruction was a period of constant struggle, of political maneuvering, social upheaval, and racial violence. It was a period where the ideals of equality and justice were tested time and again, and where the legacy of slavery cast a long shadow over the nation's future. The South emerged from the Civil War in a state of utter devastation. Cities like Richmond, Atlanta, and Charleston, once symbols of Confederate pride, lay in ruins, their streets scarred by battles and their economies shattered. Plantations, once the backbone of the Southern economy, stood abandoned or destroyed, their fields lying fallow. The war had not only claimed lives, it had decimated the South's infrastructure, leaving its economy in shambles and its people facing an uncertain future.
For Black Americans in the South, emancipation brought a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, formally abolished slavery, granting millions their long-denied freedom. Many embarked on journeys to reunite with loved ones separated by the horrors of slavery, while others sought to carve out their own paths in a world that had long denied them agency.
The Freedmen's Bureau, established by Congress in 1865, provided essential aid to these newly freed individuals, offering food, clothing, medical care, and educational opportunities. However, freedom did not automatically translate to equality. The South, deeply resistant to change, clung to its old ways. Many white Southerners, unable to accept the reality of Black freedom, viewed Reconstruction as a humiliating imposition, a period of Negro rule forced upon them by the victorious North. This resentment festered, creating fertile ground for racial tensions and violence to thrive.
The questions surrounding land ownership, economic opportunity, and political participation for freedmen remained open wounds. How would former slaves, stripped of education and opportunity for centuries, find their footing in this new society? Would they be granted the same rights and protections as their white counterparts?
And how would the nation address the deep racial prejudices that had fueled centuries of oppression? These questions, central to the promise of Reconstruction, would define the tumultuous years that followed. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, envisioned a compassionate and forgiving Reconstruction. He believed in reintegrating the South into the Union with minimal bitterness, famously stating, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." His plan, known as the 10% Plan, offered a relatively lenient path for Confederate states to rejoin the Union. It stipulated that once 10% of a state's voters pledged loyalty to the Union and acknowledged the abolition of slavery, they could form a new government and rejoin the nation. Lincoln's approach, however, was met with resistance from within his own party.
Radical Republicans, a faction within the Republican Party, viewed his plan as too lenient, arguing that it failed to adequately address the rights of freedmen and the need to punish Confederate leaders for their role in the war. We believed in a more radical transformation of the South, one that guaranteed full civil and political rights for African Americans.
Tragically, Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction would never be fully realized. On April 14, 1865, just days after the Confederate surrender at Appomattox, John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, assassinated Lincoln as he attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The nation mourned the loss of its leader, and the fate of Reconstruction now rested in the hands of his vice president, Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat from Tennessee. Lincoln's assassination marked a turning point in Reconstruction. It not only robbed the nation of a compassionate leader, but also paved the way for a more tumultuous and ultimately less successful period of Reconstruction under Johnson's leadership. The nation, still reeling from the trauma of war and grappling with the complexities of incorporating freedmen into society, now faced an uncertain future without the guiding hand of its greatest unifier. Section 4. Johnson's Reconstruction, a tenuous peace. Andrew Johnson, a man of humble beginnings and a staunch defender of states' rights, ascended to the presidency with a very different vision for Reconstruction than his predecessor.
Unlike Lincoln, Johnson believed in a lenient approach towards the defeated South, one that prioritized swift reconciliation over radical social change.
He pardoned many former Confederate leaders, allowing them to return to positions of power, and opposed efforts to grant full citizenship and voting rights to Black Americans. Johnson's policies, while aiming for swift reunification, allowed for the resurgence of racial prejudice in the South.
Former Confederate states, emboldened by Johnson's leniency, enacted a series of laws known as Black Codes. These codes severely restricted the freedoms of Black Americans, limiting their economic opportunities, mobility, and access to the legal system. They were, in essence, an attempt to reinstate many of the restrictions of slavery under a new name.
The passage of Black Codes ignited outrage in the North. Radical Republicans, already wary of Johnson's leniency, viewed these codes as a blatant attempt to circumvent the abolition of slavery and deny Black Americans their rightful place in society. The stage was set for a showdown between the President and Congress, a clash that would come to define the radical Reconstruction era.
Johnson's vision for a swift and lenient Reconstruction ultimately backfired, fueling racial tensions and setting the stage for a more radical approach led by the radical Republicans. His failure to address the root causes of the Civil War, namely slavery and racial inequality, allowed for the continuation of systemic oppression, and set the stage for the tumultuous years of struggle that would characterize the Reconstruction era.
Section 5. Radical Reconstruction, the fight for equality. The year 1867 marked a turning point in Reconstruction. Frustrated by Johnson's lenient policies and the South's resistance to change, radical Republicans in Congress took control of Reconstruction, ushering in an era known as Radical Reconstruction.
This period witnessed a concerted effort to dismantle the vestiges of slavery and ensure equal rights for Black Americans. Radical Republicans, driven by a sense of moral urgency, implemented a series of transformative measures.
They passed the Reconstruction Acts, which divided the South into military districts, required former Confederate states to ratify the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal protection under the law, and ensured Black men's right to vote. These acts, though met with fierce resistance in the South, represented a bold attempt to reshape Southern society and integrate Black Americans into the fabric of American democracy.
The Radical Reconstruction era witnessed a flourishing of Black political participation. For the first time in American history, Black men were elected to Congress, state legislatures, and local offices, giving voice to a community long silenced.
Figures like Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce emerged as powerful advocates for equality, fighting tirelessly for access to education, economic opportunity, and justice for their communities.
Radical Reconstruction, despite facing constant opposition and ultimately falling short of its goals, left an indelible mark on American history. It expanded the definition of citizenship, enshrined the principle of equal protection under the law, and provided a glimpse of what a more just and equitable society could look like.
Though short-lived, it served as a beacon of hope for generations of African Americans who continued to strive for equality in the face of adversity.